Hey guys, I am Pixel Dan. Thank you once again for joining me here on my channel for another interview. Welcoming back once again today, we have Brian Flynn from Super7 to talk about G.I. Joe. What's going on, Brian?
G.I. Joe. There we go. Come on. It's G.I. Joe. Let's go, Dan.
Yo,
Come on.
Joe.
I got a yo, Joe. Yo, Joe.
Yeah, Joe. Like it's just a very no, this is a really exciting announcement. I know this is one that you've been excited to make for a while. I know we've had several conversations over the past year talking about your different toy lines, and this is one in particular that I know you've been excited to announce, and now the information is out there. So of course we've got to meet back up so I can ask you all these questions again, and you can hopefully answer for us.
Exactly. We can talk about all the stuff we weren't allowed to talk about before. Exactly. I've been waiting to get this G.I. Joe out for a long time. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, this is really cool because like you've mentioned before that you've got a pretty great partnership going on with Hasbro, and they've allowed you to kind of, play in their sandbox with a lot of their properties. You've got the Transformers stuff coming. And so G.I. Joe that's a pretty big deal.
In my mind, it was one of those licenses that we would actually never be able to get. I mean, you have for Hasbro specifically, I mean, G.I. Joe is one of those toys that really made them into who they are, going back to the 60s, then remaking them as a company in the 80s. And if you're talking about something that they hold precious and they hold close to the vest, I mean, G.I. Joe is it. G.I. Joe is their baby. It's not a license. It's their baby. Now, where Transformers, you can argue, it is their baby, but they share that baby with Takara or Takara, depending on how you want to say it or whatever. So, they've got other things, but G.I. Joe is still, it's the first one. So I have been asking for a long time about getting into G.I. Joe. I know a lot of other people over the years that have gone to Hasbro with pitches around G.I. Joe and met with cold shoulders would be an understatement. It's just been one of those things that I didn't ever think we were really going to get the chance to get into. And obviously we're getting a chance to get into it, which is super, super exciting because there's so much exciting stuff that can be done with G.I. Joe that them allowing us to get in has been one of those real sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe we're getting to do this. It's so exciting.
And with the announcement, we found out that you're doing, like what we see typically when you get these different properties. You got the Ultimates figures coming, you've got the Reaction figures coming. So there's all kinds of different product that you're going to be doing with the brand. Let's go ahead and start with the Ultimates line. I think this is a very interesting place to start with. You kind of mentioned lots of different people doing pitches for G.I. Joe, and it's kind of one of those brands that almost was it was dormant for a while. Like I know there's so many fans that wanted to see new things with Joe, and just within the last year or so, like Hasbro started doing their classified line, their 6-inch line of G.I. Joes, which is something that had been rumored for a really long time. So now you're coming in with the Ultimates, which of course is a 7-inch line, just like all the other Ultimates lines you do. And it looks like the way that you're differentiating yourself from what Hasbro's doing with Classified is that these figures are all based on the animation, which is something we've not seen really for G.I. Joe toys before. So was this something that was part of your deal with Hasbro? Was that something that they mandated or just something that you wanted to do?
It's definitely something what we wanted to do, but it also sort of folds into, if you will, like the greater brand vision for G.I. Joe. I don't want to speak for them, but I think we can say that Hasbro is it is the biggest toy company domestically. I don't know if they're the biggest toy company in the world because I don't know how big Bandai is or whatever, but they're one of the biggest toy companies in the world. And as such, their primary job is to sell toys to children, not to old men. That's a nice secondary add-on, but much like when we were kids buying G.I. Joe, the goal was to sell kids G.I. Joe. And so in as much they are rebooting and re-updating and doing everything else that they are doing to the G.I. Joe world, franchise. You've got the Snake Eyes movie coming out. You got Classified, which came out, I think, what did it get announced? 2 New York toy fairs ago?
Yeah, I think we're about 2 years in on that one already.
Yeah, I think it was February 19 that they announced it
Yeah.
at Toy Fair, because it sort of broke the internet for a lot of toy nerds.
Right.
And, with people very divided on whether they liked it or not because it was different. But then, as most people have seen now that they've got the toys, they understand the aesthetic and the play value, they're in on it. And so G.I. Joe is doing very well in that regard. And really how I sort of set us up as, can we come in on that adult collector side and satisfy a very vocal group that in their business is a wonderful minority, but a minority. And, you've got a lot of people that oftentimes will get stuck in if you don't give me what I want, I'm not interested in what else you have. And if I can give some of these people what I think they want, I believe that they're going to be far more open to new interpretations that you might have as well. I'm speaking a little out of turn in that regard, but we try to also frame it up of how what we make is supportive of the overall G.I. Joe brand and their brand goals. And obviously it's something specifically that I want, but if it's not helping the greater cause of G.I. Joe and what they're trying to do with the brand, they're definitely not going to let us do it, if that makes any sense.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Of course.
A little quasi corporate speak without getting into things maybe I can and can't talk about, but our goal is to support the collector groups. I'm not trying to sell to kids. If kids buy my toys, that's great, but I'm talking to a very specific demographic.
Right. So that's why we've got like this first run. Everything we see in this first wave here does appear to be inspired by the original animated series. So is that kind of the planned route for the entire line, or do you think you guys can do some things from other media like the comic books and stuff like that too?
We're starting with the comic books from wave one. Come on, we got Quinn.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, yes, the reaction figures.
We're talking about Ultimate, so we're not talking about reaction.
But I guess the reaction figures are a good indicator that you could do stuff like that for Ultimates as well.
We plan to be going around the entirety of G.I. Joe. It's like we're obviously focusing heavily right now in the beginning on really what was done on the cartoon and making stuff that looks like the cartoon. If anybody's been following us, obviously they've seen us do this multiple times. We did it with Masters. That's our take on Thundercats. Here's our take on Silverhawks. Now we're coming in on G.I. Joe and making stuff that's very cartoon centric. So if you're collecting the Ultimates line, you can line these things up and these different worlds can play seamlessly within each other, as well as it's something that really hasn't been touched, because the way that show was developed was toy first, show second. And as they moved forward and things got developed in parallel, they synced up more. That's not exactly how proper grammar works, but they were more in sync. But in the beginning, they were definitely disparate. And what you saw on screen was often very different from what you saw in plastic. And so for me, I'm very interested in getting those versions of those characters that I don't have.
Sure. Okay. So, and then like when we're talking about like some of the accessories and stuff that comes with these figures, like I know that it was pointed out that Duke's accessories, for example, like there's some show specific stuff, but there is stuff that's kind of like it's skewed more towards what came with the original action figure as well. So you are kind of intermingling that stuff in there.
We're intermingling it stuff. So if you look at Snake Eyes, it's like, okay, there's multiple different kinds of guns based on what you're looking at. Are you looking at the cartoon? Are you looking at the toy? Are you looking at the comic? What are those kind of different things? So we're definitely pulling it all in. The aesthetic of the overall figure is heavily driven by what you saw on screen, but the accessories are coming from all over the place. And I keep mentioning this because this is my favorite accessory out of the whole group. Let's see if I can get it near the camera there with some light, which is the globe with the Cobra wrapped around it. And this is from the ad that they ran in the comic books of Cobra Commander holding the world with the Cobra wrapped around it for the video game. So this is from the ad of the video game. But I always just loved that image and that scene. I mean, technically you can go into the comic books, and I think it's way later in like issue 80, there's on the background, there's a globe with a cobra wrapped around it, but there's it doesn't really appear anywhere else. It's from an ad for a video game with Cobra Commander, and you're like, yes, we need that.
That's amazing. I see, and I love obscure stuff like that too. So that's really fun, kind of injecting some of that in there. So that's cool. That's good to know that you're kind of looking at all these different sources and creating these really cool figure packages with all of that.
Definitely.
So do you think we will see some of those more like iconic like accessories from the animated series? I know the mass device has been brought up a lot. Do you think you would do
Yes.
stuff like that in this
A
line?
giant mass device
Yeah,
that
like a bit. Somebody suggested like I don't know if you would ever do like a collect and connect kind of thing or something like that, where you can include pieces of it with the different figures.
yeah, I mean, obviously we have just got the first figures out as of like what, 2 weeks now.
Right, exactly. I
Uh,
know we got a long way to go.
we got a long way to go, but yeah, that's exactly the wheelhouse that we typically run into though, is like, okay, you've been collecting GI Joe now for 40 years, since the early 80s. So you've got a lot of GI Joe. So what do we not have? What do I not have? What's interesting to me that keeps me excited about something new with GI Joe that still makes me feel like a kid again? That's the part I'm looking at. So when it is like, oh, here's the giant mass device with the 3 elements or anything else like that could be really cool. It's almost like the GI Joe space jockey.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So with the animated looks or like just some of the character choices or costumes that you're going off of, do you have to stay focused on Sunbow, or is Deke an option too, the different animated series there? Or is like, I don't know if anything's like off the table as far as that stuff goes.
So far that I know of, nothing's really off the table. The only things that are kind of off the table that we would just need to do extra work on become some of those things where they are people that exist outside of the franchise, like Sergeant Slaughter or, the fridge, stuff like that.
Yeah, that was going to be
That's
one of
not to
my
say that we
questions.
can't
So
go get those licenses and do that, but that's where it gets to be a little bit more complicated. But for the most part, in terms of vintage uh, inspiration, they're sort of letting us go where we want to go.
well, speaking of like outside, since you've got license to do both right now, could we see like a GI Joe versus Transformers type crossover? Maybe something from those books.
It's very, very plausible that you could see stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
I would
Cool.
say there's nothing in the immediate future for that, but it's not like we haven't talked about a whole lot of crossovers. Like, where are places that GI Joe has shown up that would be interesting, or could show up that would be interesting?
Very cool. Very cool. So I guess kind of along those same lines about like things you can and can't do. I've seen a lot of chatter around Cobra Commander, and the fact that he's got a helmeted head but no hooded head. And I have seen some rumor that that might be like a rule that we can't do hooded
Everybody
Cobra
has
Commanders.
No, the internet has melted down because I made a comment to somebody specifically that asked me about the hooded Cobra Commander. And I said, at this time, they've asked us not to use the hood. I didn't say anything else about why or what. I
Okay.
didn't say that it was permanent. Um, Obviously, I don't want to also speak for Hasbro. So you can't infer my statement that I'm speaking for the whole of Hasbro or making any other assumptions as such. In working on this figure, simply they just said, we'd rather this be, Cobra with the helmet, and we'd not like to make the hood at this time. That it, if you look at what Hasbro's made recently, you could infer the same, that they're having the same conversations internally, but I can't speak to it. That is not to say that it will never come back. We've made t-shirts. If you look at the t-shirts we've made, a year or two ago, we made the 8-bit Cobra Commander and he's wearing the hood, the digitized video game Cobra Commander shirt.
Right.
So we've made stuff in the past with Cobra Commander with a hood. This particular figure is not, and I've been asked not asked, like we had it in the line sheet and they said, let's not do the hood for now. So I said, okay, that's fine. So whether or not it comes back or is deemed appropriate, I think that's probably part of just what is the larger strategy around Cobra Commander that I'm not privy to. And I don't pretend to. And I think that anyone within, there's a lot of people are like, he's supposed to be a bad guy. And it's like, okay, well, I understand your argument, but that doesn't mean that even if I was going to and I'm making this statement without anything, like, just because I'm making bad guys doesn't mean I want to make a figure of a Ku Klux Klan member. And I'm not saying that Cobra Commander is or any of that. But when people make that analogy, I'm going, yeah, but you wouldn't make that toy either. Just because he's a bad guy doesn't mean that he gets carte blanche to be anything you want him to be. So I can't speak to any of the reasonings behind it. And I think that there's more than enough versions of him in his helmet, which is how you had him as a toy first. You had to mail away for the hood originally. It is how he appears in the first few miniseries. The majority of the time is with his helmet. So I don't see a huge issue with it. I think it's more an easy point of outrage for people. Oh, we're going to get all worked up about the fact that, he's being banned for this. And it's like, no, we're just not doing that right now. Is that okay? Have I totally gone off a tangent at this point?
Maybe a little, but no,
Maybe.
you just, no, it's good. It's good to kind of get that out there. Cause I was curious too. I didn't know. I had heard rumblings that was sort of like a Hasbro mandate. Of course, I don't know that for certain either. So that definitely helps to clarify that a little bit.
And I can't sit here and say that this is a mandate and I don't want to speak for them. I'm just saying, like, when people say, hey, why don't you have that hood? I can say, like, hey, right now, we were asked not to put the hood on that figure. He's still got multiple other heads and all this other stuff. Right. He's got so much crazy. It's like, but we're not making that at this time. That's not to say it's permanent. It's not to infer why or why not, because I can't speak to it. I think it's been interesting since I made that comment, how it's sort of taken on this sort of outrage life of its own. And it's like, really, that's what you're worried about? Like, I'm far more worried about the fact that, they put extra banthas in the Tatooine scene that weren't there.
Oh, we're on the special editions now.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, like what is a Ronto? Come on,
what is a Ronto?
Yeah, we did not need a Ronto.
Oh, boy.
Okay, we did not need a Jawa riding a four-legged giraffe thing. Like,
all right, I don't know how we got here, but here we are.
But the point being is that when people act like this is the end of the world, I'm like, I don't know that this is. I think we're making a bigger issue out of it than it is. And is this figure?
And basically, like, this doesn't mean like no forever. I mean, Hasbro
doesn't mean no
said
forever.
Not right now, but maybe, if you get a chance to do it, we'll do it, right?
Yeah. When there's, I think that clearly, we have made product in the past that had a hooded Cobra Commander on it. Right now, I mean, I think you would be remiss as a cognitive adult to think that maybe a large international toy company would have to take a look and understand how they feel and what the correct position is to put a figure with a hood like that out and say, like, hey, how does this relate to the world at large? How does it relate to this character, fictional as he is? And where do we believe that this is okay? And where do we believe that's not? And if they haven't figured that out yet, then wait. Okay, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate the explanation. Honestly, I've seen a lot of talk about it, and it was something I was very curious about myself. So I think that's good to put it out there.
And in the version of this that somebody at Hasbro will probably ask me about, I will say once again that I am not in any way speaking for Hasbro or know any of their intentions behind this. This is merely me as somebody else making stuff, commenting on it.
There you go. And Pixel Dan is not trying to get Brian or Super7 in trouble.
I am not trying to get in trouble, but I'm also just being very honest with you.
Yes. No, that's great. That's great, man. I appreciate that. Well, let's change topics then. We'll talk about character selection, because I always love talking about like the character choices and why you went that route. And I think looking at the first
sommelier of toy collecting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love best. Well, you look at wave 1, and I think it's pretty obvious why the choices were made. It's the introduction.
I think 3 of the
to the
4
line.
are very obvious.
3 of the 4 are very obvious, with Duke and Cobra Commander and Snake Eyes.
Yes.
But the Bat, I think, is the one that's a little more surprising. I think, like, when you think about army builders, it's interesting that you wouldn't start with like the Cobra Troopers. But a Bat is still a very cool looking character. So
I think
Brian.
This all comes back down to, this is the point why this is my toy company. I'm like, you know what? I'm making a Bat because I love the Bat. It's no different than, like Super Cyborg. First thing out the gate was Bat.
Right.
It wasn't some of the other robots and different things that we could have pulled from, but it was like, cause Bat's awesome. And so in here, it's like, we're planning out the first wave. Obviously, Cobra Commander's the no-brainer. And Snake Eyes is the no-brainer. Then if we're talking about the animated series, well, Duke's really the lead. The story flows through Duke in most cases for this. So we kind of have to run with Duke as your first stop. But then on the Cobra side, you have Cobra Commander, then you jump down and it's like you have tons of people. Is it Destro? Is it Baroness? Is it Major Blood? Like there's a lot of people you could go to, Serpentor, whatever. And it's like, you know what? Then I'm going to go with what I want, which is I want a Bat. Let's make Bat the next one. So it wasn't an overt, like, let's make an army builder from the get-go on Ultimates, because at that price point, it's a hefty commitment to army building. It was more that just Bat's so badass that I'm getting him out early.
Let's talk about that price point. You just brought it up. I think that's a great segue. Let's talk about, we've brought this up on numerous interviews recently when we're talking about Ultimates, but as I always bring up, you every time you introduce one of these new licenses, you possibly have a new audience buying your product, and then the same questions pop up. Why are these $55 a piece? So Brian, I will let you explain.
It's a question that we constantly have to come back and readdress. There is a dramatic difference, I think, obviously, between what people think gets made in terms of toy production and what is actually made. And this becomes that sort of conversation where you and the 100 or 500 or 1,000 or however many people online that you interact with through Instagram or through Facebook groups or on a chat board, you're like, everybody I know is buying this. Everyone's getting this. There must be tons of them. And it's like, there's actually far fewer adults buying these toys than you think. Because if you take yourself out of context of what you do day to day, and you go to your job, or you go to the sandwich store at lunch, or you go to a restaurant at dinner, the chances of you bumping into yet another adult that buys these toys is very, very small, unless you're going to dinner with your friends that collect toys. So there's not near as many people buying these things as people believe there are, which is the core thing of what happens when they're like, Target just restocked these things and they were gone in an hour. It's like, yeah, Target restocked enough for what they thought was buying. And it's like, that's it. There's a finite amount. That's why they're gone. Because one more dude showing up wrecks the whole, long Bezier curve of supply and demand they've put together. So first off, there's not as many people buying these as you think.
Okay.
And secondarily,
can I cut in real quick? I want to kind of add a little bit to that to kind of play devil's advocate for you here.
Mm-hmm.
So I know like this is the same price point that you've set for your Ultimate figures that we've seen recently. And the most recent that we talked about was Silverhawks, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty well known, obviously. Like there's a fans for Silverhawks, but if we're talking like fan base for something like Silverhawks, it's much more niche than fan base for something like GI Joe, which, while it hasn't been around a lot recently, it is a bit more mainstream. So I think it's easy to think that, well, GI Joe will definitely sell more units than Silverhawks. So if that's the case, does that alter the price point you have to charge? Like, if you were able to sell way more of those, why do you continue to have to charge the $55 price point? Does that make sense?
There's sort of two sides to that. So the first off is, theoretically speaking, you could get to that, but the volume jump that we would need to make from what we're actually selling to what something that is going into like mass retail is so divergent that it's like, yes, I am going to sell more GI Joes than Silverhawks, but it is not exponential to a rate that radically changes the mechanics of the math. Like when I start selling, like the parable or the example that people will use right now might be, why does NECA charge $29.99 and we charge $55? So part of it is the amount of stuff that it comes with. Part of it is the packaging. Part of it is simply like, you can go and buy it at Walmart, you can buy it at Target, you can buy it at all these other places. Like, they're getting economies of scale that we are not getting. We are not selling it to those people. And quite frankly, I don't think we're allowed to. I'd have to go back and double check, but you're not going to see it that way. Even if you get those economies of scale, like, it's also dependent upon how your business is structured. When I look at traditional toy companies, and I'm going to try not to give away some of the secret sauce that I've learned over the years with some of these guys, their market is in volume. So they may only be making 10% margin on a toy. So if you're buying it for $12.99 at Target, they may be selling it to Target for literally like $10 and paying $8 to make it. So their thing is, but I'm going to make my money in selling 150,000 of these. I'm only going to make a little bit of money. And so you look at mass retail, and it's really driven by volume is what makes your money, not margin, if you will. Where if all of a sudden you remove the volume play out of that scenario, the only way to make this work is by making margin. So in a case like this, where you're talking about something that I wish I could use real world examples, but then I'd get some sort of death letter from Mattel or somebody. But it's like,
don't get us in trouble.
I don't get in trouble, but like, Hot Wheels as an example. Like, Hot Wheels are $1.29 on shelf, and they go on sale for 99 cents, and it's a die-cast metal car. Like, the reason that works is because they sell 500 million cars a year. It's some number that's so absolutely astronomical, it's hard to fathom that it could actually happen. But it happens because of volume. But the amount of money that they make on that car is so little that that's what allows it to be sold at that price. And I would say that while, you're starting to see what we have to deal with in the very beginning to simply get these toys made, the cost per unit is so much higher because we are not playing in volume. And when you're seeing, what I seeing is when you walk into like those Targets and everything, even on the regular toy aisles now, people are like, a traditional action figure hanging on the toy aisle for $19.99 for a fortnight or whatever. You're definitely seeing everybody else's prices creep up to the mental picture of where it would be. So this is a long way of going backwards, is saying, yes, there are more people we believe more people will buy GI Joe from us, but the core of how we get to being able to develop the product really hasn't changed. And the number more that we're going to sell is not so demonstrative that it changes the mechanics of the business of making the toy. And that's the crux of it. It's like, if, and I say this, and then there's somebody that's going to be that's going to want to counterpoint every one of these conversations. But if it was easy and inexpensive to make these toys, then everybody would be doing it. And the reality is it's not. And quite honestly, toys have been so underpriced in the market for so long that people believe that's the normal. And I will go back to Star Wars figures, because we did this a long time ago when people would complain about reaction figures. If you take what it cost to buy a Star Wars figure in 1978 and just simply adjust for inflation, it should be $28 today. That's what a 3 3/4 action figure should cost you, is $28. That is apples to apples. But because people have been able to play, retailers pushing down prices to allow it to sell more, it's become sort of an unstable value where either you're playing at the billion-dollar level like Hasbro and Mattel are. Think about it. And this is a perfect example. You've got Hasbro, you've got Mattel, you've got Playmates to a degree, you've got Spin Master, and then you have nothing below that. Funko is the only one that exists in the middle, and they're at what, $750 million a year company? And then there's nothing all the way down. Somebody is literally knocking at the door. Anyway, so where I was going with that is where toy prices have come and what people believe are the established norms for toy prices are only being dictated by 2 or 3, 4 giant multi-billion-dollar companies working in extreme volume. And there is nothing that exists smaller than that, because the system that sells toys to people through mass retail or whatever cannot support anything that is not that model. And that's why literally you have Hasbro, Mattel, Spin Master, these guys, and you have a gulf between billion-dollar companies and then down to companies like myself and NECA, or Mezco, that are really small, seemingly pervasive to a certain small sector of collector, but there is nothing in between. And that's because actually it's really expensive to make this stuff. But
and I imagine, especially with
what's that?
I was going to say, I imagine when you're dealing with things like G.I. Joe, there's probably like licensing fees and stuff on top of all that too,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Everything just about, we make has a license fee though associated.
Sure.
So that's not unique to G.I. Joe. I think that the perception though of what things cost and how you get them made is radically different than reality, because the only version of the reality of buying toys most people have ever really dealt with is a large scale mass market version. I mean, and I say this as a person that grew up with it. I mean, how many people do we know that wake up every day and hit Target on their way to work? Every day, every other day. That's the way you buy and consume toys for the vast majority of toy collectors. And so your perception is colored by that's the way the system works and that's how it should be priced. Well, that system only works if you make $1 billion worth of product. If you're not making $1 billion worth of product, you can't use that formula. You have to use a radically different formula. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, that costs how much? It's like, yeah, it's fucking expensive. Because I can't survive on 5% and 10% margins. Like that's not, like, no one can actually work here then. So I have to make more money per figure. So then that's how you end up at a $55 toy. That used to be, and then you deal with all the changes in the global infrastructure, China growing out of very quickly moving from a mass production blue collar company into a white collar country. You have, shortages on paper has gone up 400% for us. all those kind of things.
I've heard the stories of the shipping too, like the shipping containers, like being way up in price and stuff like that. Like just
Shipping is roughly 3x what it was a year ago.
that's
A year
insane.
ago, it was clockwork. It was 24 days from port to port, clockwork. If it
And we're
got
still
stuck,
obviously we're still experiencing side effects from everything being closed
oh,
for a year and stuff like that too.
so shipping right now. I mean, I'm going to use our beloved Teenage Mutant Ninja Wave 3 as an example. Like, I have 3 of the 4 figures in the warehouse. I've had Michelangelo in Michelangelo. Shit, I can't even keep it straight anymore. I have had the turtle because we were talking about Michelangelo yesterday, and then I went, "Is it Donatello?" Anyways, I've had the turtle in the warehouse now for 7 weeks. 7 weeks, and I still don't have the 4th figure in the warehouse, and they all arrived at the port at the same time. It's still sitting on a boat in the bay. When is it going to get here?
That's crazy. Well,
It's
yeah,
crazy.
I've heard that too. Like there's nobody to unload these things, so they're sitting in ports for weeks and months at a time. Like that's unreal.
And there's no rhyme or reason to it. We have things where you book cargo in China and then it gets canceled because somebody was willing to pay more.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a host of downstream issues that come with it. So like same thing, like packaging, paper has gone up about 400%, shipping's up 300%. And that's just, in the last 6 months. So that's not even attributed to when we had to go increase in price. Labor costs have gone up, everything. And so then you also have to follow that, like, hey, I was getting it for this price. Now it's 20% more from the factory. And every year, like any other form of inflation, those prices just keep rising. And that's how you end up at $55, which is probably a very long way of not a satisfactory answer to anyone that wants to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean it's wild, and it's like I appreciate all this information. Like this stuff is fascinating to me, even if it's not fun to hear. Do you worry that like this not only, I mean, it's going to price people out, but like, do you worry that like it's just going to get worse and it's going to get harder to even be able to afford? Like, are toys going to get too expensive for us to even collect at
Well,
this rate?
I think what you've already seen though is the vast majority of toy companies are actively moving out of China. Like, and I say this is because I know those guys. Like, Funko went to Vietnam like a decade ago. All that stuff's made in Vietnam and Thailand and other places. Like, we are in both China and Vietnam now because it will price itself out. It's harder and harder to get people that want to work at a factory because they don't have to work at a factory. So they have to pay more to get people to work there. I mean, it's no different than the American Industrial Revolution. I mean, America in 1970, there were factories everywhere. And then in the 1980s, it was all the car companies left and moved and everything. America went through a version where they're like, nobody wants to work in a factory anymore. So move it someplace else. You can't get denim that's made here. Cone Mills shipped off, the last place in America that had weaving looms, sold off their denim weaving looms. Like, America is not a manufacturing company, and no different than how everything else in modern life has accelerated faster and faster and faster. China has moved from being a manufacturing country to moving into an office and educated job country faster than America did, simply because it's a more modern era and they can. And so now you're seeing that move over to other countries. So most of the industry is moving to Vietnam, moving to Thailand, Cambodia, and India is probably the country that's going to be next after that.
Well, now that we're all good and depressed about the way
About
things
the
are
state
very
of the world or
expensive in the
whatever.
state of the world. Yep, that's
Well, I
right.
mean, it's been a very interesting thing. I mean, we had conversations at one point trying to break down the numbers of what would it take to bring back manufacturing back into the States, which is, even if it cost us 25 to 33%, quarter to a third more per unit to manufacture in the States, but you could remove shipping and time delays, and you could remove communication delays. Would the net be worth it? And it's like, it's probably pretty darn close, but I can barely make sure to get my toys out in time, much less, figuring out how to build the factory and dealing with the EPA and making sure I'm doing things correctly, which I don't think would necessarily be hard, but it's a different business. And my business is making the toys right now, not trying to run a factory.
Sure. It's interesting though to kind of think about like where this stuff might head in the next 10
Well, because
years
you
or
start to
so.
get into boutique manufacturing. And I'll say this because we did this. I mean, I've spent many times over the years going to different injection molding factories within the US that still exist and saying, hey, I want to make this. And their answer is, this is hard. Like I want to make 10,000 feet of clear tubing. Paint becomes an issue because my factory was built 40 years ago. So for me to be able to deal with paint, I've got to go a whole new thing going through how I deal with what paints I use, vent hoods. I've got to build out all this stuff around safety for that. I'm not set up for paint. I'm not set up for complex molding, like pulling all this stuff out of a mold where it stretches at different, areas. Like as you're pulling this out, like if I've got more of a grip and there's more space for it to pull on, it's going to stretch a little bit different, like how we deal with complex molding, how you deal with waste, how you deal with painting. Once I upgrade that part of the factory, I've got to upgrade everything to ADA. It's not worth my time. That was the craziest part, where it's not worth my time. But in a lot of ways, you are talking about boutique manufacturing, which is, you've seen it if you look parables into vinyl records, where multiple pressing plants have really come through. Like Furnace is a perfect example out in Tennessee, where he got started early, like 6-7 years ago, found all these American pressing plants that were in record pressing machines in Mexico, brought them up, spent like 2 years retooling them just to get them to work, and then built a brand new factory. But in building that brand new factory, it was optimized for making runs of 500, runs of 1,000, not optimized for making runs of 100,000. And the American injection molding thing is optimized to make 100,000. And so you would have to start over with a completely different factory model, which could work, but it would be a lot of work.
Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
on a real fucking tangent now.
No,
Dave.
it's cool, man. It's really insightful, and I appreciate you like really digging into that and kind of explaining it all. I think that's important to kind of put that information out there.
Well,
Um,
it's interesting because I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you just go to a factory and make it. And I'm
well,
like,
yeah,
oh my
like I
God,
mean,
no. It's nowhere near that easy. And even if you can go to a factory, just because they have the machines doesn't mean they can make it.
like I mean, like the guys like me who just like buying toys because toys are cool. I mean, as far as we think about it. Like we think about it in the way that we can walk in, we can exchange $20 for a cool new action figure, and that's just the way it should be everywhere, right? That's just what we think. So I think one of the things that I've always really liked about doing what I do is learning about the industry and how it works and getting all this kind of inside information. And I like to try to put that out there so that other people who are also interested can learn. So I think you are a big help for that. And I always appreciate you taking the time to like explain this stuff. Cause I mean, I'll be honest, I don't get that kind of depth from a lot of other toy companies or other people that I talk to in the industry. And I understand why not everybody wants to get into that or can't get into that. But
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that you really bring to the table when we have these discussions. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for people to understand that, even though GI Joe will be, I believe, and is trending to be a very, very well selling release for us, it's still a pittance compared to what those big toy companies sell. It's
Sure.
still just it's not even like a fraction. Like we're dealing in decibel points at this point. You know, and I will, same thing. I can't say who it was, but we took over a license for somebody a number of years ago. And the way they described that business that they had internally was it was a rounding error.
A
That was the
rounding
scale of
error.
the business. It was a
Wow.
rounding error.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
But a
interesting.
rounding error to them because of their scale. To me, it was a significant something that we could actually make and and really, you know, build our business on.
Right.
But to them, it was a passing notice at best.
That's interesting. I mean, like, I've always heard stuff like that. That's interesting. Huh. Well, so let's move.
And now I've depressed you again.
Let's move forward a little bit. So just to kind of bring it back around full circle. So the cost is $55 per figure. And the way that you guys always do your Ultimates figures is that you do an open pre-order. So that's how the G.I. Joe is running as well, correct?
Right. Right. So the reason that we do the open pre-orders is sort of two or threefold. So first off, the worst thing that could happen is if you buy a toy from me and it's worth less after you buy it. And I say that in the regard of there have been lots of times where you buy a more deluxe toy that got overproduced and a year later, you know, it's on sale someplace for half price or a third off or whatever. I don't want that to happen. Secondly, I don't want to make them and have them sell out in a day and then you can't get it. It's difficult. You had to pay twice retail on the secondary market. That's not what I want to do here. I want to make toys and I want everybody that wants to get them to have a chance to get them. So by having an 1 month open pre-order, I've given everybody a full month to buy one of these toys if they want it. Now, there may be a chance that they don't, but or can't in that month, but I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for you to get it. You want to buy one set, that's fine. You want to buy 10 sets, that's fine. I'm not going to, you know, whatever. I'm just trying to make a toy and give you a chance to buy it. In that, I make exactly how many are needed. So I don't overproduce, I don't underproduce. The catch though is by making it an open pre-order is that I can't manufacture it until after we sell it, which then causes the delay. So it's always one of those things where people are like, you know, you can have it cheap or you can have it fast or you can have it well made or whatever. In this case, the fast is what we have to give up. For making it so that you don't have to jump through hoops to get it, it causes us to then not be able to start. Typically in the past, I'll back up. Typically in the past, it was also a thing where financially we had to make sure that we were committing to something that would work. Like we're too small to go ahead and tool something up and get it ready for production and then find out that we can't sell it. Like it would cripple us. So there was also a way for us to prove that the fan base was there that would support the line. Now we have gotten bigger. So in a case like G.I. Joe, actually, you know, I'm not waiting till the pre-order is over to send it to Tool. I'm feeling confident about it. I feel good. We've already sent it to Tool. The window is going to get smaller and smaller from pre-solicitation to delivery, but it's still going to take probably 8 months simply because we've got to contend with Chinese New Year, which takes 2 months out of the equation all by itself. So, you know, that's why I can't deliver it in February or March because nobody's working for the month of February, which means they don't get back till the 1st of March, which means if they put it on a boat at the end of March, it doesn't show up till May, and I'm shipping it to you in late May or June. So we're not in that zone. We're trying to get it shipped before Chinese New Year, but I'm going to probably not get it out till a couple months later. But, you know, I've derailed myself. But the original point was, why do we do it? That's why we do it. So everybody gets a chance. I'm not trying to play favorites. I'm not trying to be the cool guy and look, we sold out in 30 minutes, or I'm not trying to make it hard for you or painful for you. This is supposed to be fun. And I'm trying to make it as easy and painless as possible.
And how, I know you try not to have too many open pre-orders at once. So do you have any kind of thoughts on like how many waves you'll go on GI Joe before we wait?
How many waves? No, the plan, theoretically speaking, the way it should work in its optimized settings, which is how Turtles works. Thundercats 3 is working, not so much Thundercats 2, but is that we go in 4-month increments. So we will do this figure, this wave 1 here. 4 months later, I will do wave 2. 4 months later should be the time that wave 1 is delivering. And at that point, then I am asking you to pre-order wave 3. 4 months after that, wave 2 should be landing, and I should be making you, offering you the wave 4. So the idea is that you never have more than 2 open pre-orders at a time. So in as much, if we haven't delivered that other pre-order, I can't ask you for another one. So that's why where everybody keeps asking me where Thundercats Wave 5 is, I'm like, Thundercats Wave 5 happens when Wave 3 delivers. Like until I give you Wave 3, I can't give you Wave 5. So you'll never be out more than 2 pre-orders at a time. And ideally, with the factory that we're going with this, with what we've done there in the past, we should be able to stay on cadence and moving through without too much issue. There's definitely pre-orders that come up that things go wrong. Sometimes things go wrong in tooling, and that sets you back another 60 days, 45 to 60 days in getting things going, where they just become problematic. Or we run into factory issues. I think anybody that's followed us on Thundercats sort of knows the issues we ran into with Thundercats Wave 2. NJPW was another one that we ran into a host of issues with. But most of the other pre-orders that we're working on are coming on a regular basis. Like Andre the Giant was shipping last week. Turtles Wave 3, we're just waiting on one other figure to show up. It's ready to go out. We're already in production on Wave 4. They're moving pretty clockwork. So I'm really hoping that we will be clockwork on GI Joe. That's the goal, is to get away from those factories where we're getting bumped for Jurassic Park.
Right. So
that's a thing for everybody else that's listening to this for the first time. You can go onto a Thundercats one where I can talk about the fact that Thundercats Wave 2 is at the same factory where they make Jurassic Park, and I am not their top priority.
You're not the priority there.
I am not the priority.
Oh, those dinosaurs. What the heck?
People like dinosaurs, apparently.
People do. My kid loves dinosaurs, so I can't even argue with that. Yeah. So I know we're like speculating into the future and everything, but I assume you have an idea of what you want to do for all the waves. Like
we gave, when we went in to Hasbro, we gave them a specific, very granular outline for the first 3 years. So in as much, that tells me that, so, I have way up to wave 12 planned and done.
Dang.
Now, that said, wave 9. So it'll be 333. So wave 9. I've got 9. Those first 9 waves are already done, planned. On our side, we're working on wave 3 right now. So wave 2's already been done. Worked on. We're now at sort of more of the output paint level thing. Like, it's going to take a little while, but yeah, we gave a very, very detailed plan that was 3 years in the works. Then on side of that, like, here's all the other shit we want to get to in years after this. So ideally, if this runs the way we hope, where something like Masters went for 10 years, there's no reason to think GI Joe couldn't go on as long as people are interested. There are enough characters, there's enough unique places that we could be doing this for, as long as people are willing to be interested in what those characters are.
So how long do I have to wait for a Boy George Snake Eyes?
Oh, come on. No. That's one of the things that we get asked about. You'd be surprised how many people asked about that.
I know. That's not shocking at all.
Because you gotta get Snake Eyes, and you gotta get Shipwreck.
Yeah.
You can't have just one. No,
That sounds like a good exclusive idea. That's all I'm
see
saying.
that's the kind of thing that is a perfect exclusive, and I'm not saying that it might not happen one day.
All right. Hey, okay. I
We
like
we
it.
we next year we've got a curveball for 2022 that's gonna melt people's brains. It's gonna be
Ooh,
rad. We've
it's
got a
gonna be
rad curveball for next year that no one's gonna see coming.
like a big old giant hiss tank,
I can't tell you what that
like
curveball is, but
a USS Flag that's bigger than my car.
it would have to be. No, there's definitely some unexpected stuff that we're getting into that I think people are going to be very excited about. Because I know
Awesome.
how excited I am by it, and I know excited the team that's working on it is. Because we're working on some packaging for some next year stuff right now, and like they're just like, I can't believe we're doing this. I'm
That's
like, oh
great.
yeah, we're doing this.
That's great to hear. Very cool. Very cool. All right, so let's dip into reaction a little bit
All right,
because
let's dip into React.
that was the other big reveal, and of course, GI Joe, a real American hero, is primarily well known as a 3 3/4 inch action figure line. However,
I think GI Joe was a 3 3/4 inch action line that then spawned
okay,
a cartoon.
there you go. You are correct. So
Yes.
O-rings.
Oh,
That's
really?
obviously the big draw of GI Joe, and I assume that's something that you probably couldn't do with your GI Joe
Yeah. I
line.
mean, when we went and we're talking with Hasbro, one of the first things we talked about was O-ring. Um, that said, what they came back to us was like, oh, we can make O-ring. We don't necessarily need you guys for O-ring. Like, we know how to make O-ring. Like, that's what we do. And what's interesting to us is your alternative history to what's going on. Reaction is something that you guys have really dialed in and really know. And it's like, if you guys want to go down that route, we're willing to let you say, this is what GI Joe could have looked like if it had come out as a reaction figure. And so that's where we went. Like I said, I think, it's definitely one of those things where as we were starting on this, I felt like that we were probably going to get a lot of blowback around the fact that we weren't making O-ring figures for GI Joe, because I know that there's a demand for it. But at the same time, it's not to say that I don't love 5 POA figures. Clearly, we've made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And I was like, okay, yes, I have complete thoughts about what I would do in an O-ring situation, but I also have a complete point of view about what I would do had I almost look at this as an alternate reality where these came out as 5 POA figures, as reaction figures. And that's what they said that's what we could do. So I ran with it. I'm not going to be like, can't do it. It's not O-ring. Like, no way. I personally, love 5 POA figures. And as a kid, one of the things that did annoy me about GI Joes is because the O-rings got really loose and wobbly, and I snapped them. And the O-ring articulation in GI Joe is a complete downstream from the 12-inch multi-articulated GI Joe mixed with what they were doing with Micronauts, which had the O-ring thing. And they sort of meshed that into a new thing, especially once you get into, how they did the 90-degree elbow bends with the 50-50 joint and everything. Like the swivel on it is definitely a takedown from sort of like their idea of like how you would do a Kung Fu grip, but for 3 3/4. So that was how they got to what O-ring was. And as a kid, I can say that I preferred my Star Wars articulation over my GI Joe articulation. I can say that knowing though that for a lot of people, the big draw for GI Joe was the articulation.
I was about to say that it's interesting to hear, because that is opposite of what I've always heard. Like, I remember even lots of kids when I was younger, like, oh, look how like my GI Joes move. I wish my wrestling figures moved the way my GI Joe figures do. They can actually do moves to each other, stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, it's completely true, and it's completely true. I think the thing is, like, I come back to it, is like, that said, I'm not trying to convince you, if you like O-rings better, that you should like my figures. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm not this is not necessarily for everyone. This is not a product that's meant to be the end all be all for everyone and every collector. This is meant for somebody like me, or somebody that's interested in a new line of GI Joe to collect, possibly. And so I think where we went with it is very different, because, for me, like, Scarlett always drove me crazy as a toy because the stars weren't correct on her gloves, that sort of stuff. It's like, so I'm making my version of what GI Joe would and could have been for somebody that's coming from a similar point of view to me, knowing that it's not for every GI Joe collector.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? All these different types of toys out there, different types of GI Joe figures. So I think
Yes.
that's cool. And I love seeing what you're doing with them too. I mean, the packaging is an obvious homage to the old stuff, and I think
Oh,
that's
clearly.
beautiful. Like, I
It's
love.
one of the most iconic toy packages ever. Like,
Absolutely.
we
Absolutely.
actually had, I shit you not, we had a long sit down, drag out meeting of like, should we use the explosion or not? Because does it imply to some people that it has an O-ring? Do they just associate it too tightly
Oh,
to
okay.
that? And in the end, it was just like, but it's GI Joe. Like, that explosion is just so much part of the DNA of GI Joe. To go without it feels wrong. It just doesn't feel like what this is and what this should be. So yeah, clearly we are homaging to that GI Joe burst packaging, very clearly,
It's very
but
cool.
trying to do our twist on it.
And you mentioned, we talked briefly about army builders earlier, and you are
Yes.
going like all out with your army builders with the reaction line, which is very fun.
Yeah, and obviously that's the same thing as understanding. So I mean, of course I have them all right here off camera, just conveniently.
Oh,
No,
it's like you knew.
So the waves are set up. I have to do it this way. So the waves are set up to where we have 4 figures from each side in each wave. So you've got 4 Joe figures and 4 Cobra figures. Of that, 3 of the figures are main figures. Here we got Cobra, Baroness, and Destro. There we go. Looking good, guys. And then we have 1, if you will, army builder. So that said, I'm not trying to force you to buy more than 1 of these. Like, I'm trying to make it so that you get, if you just need a green shirt, you can just get a green shirt. But if you are building an army, there's some variety within these figures. And so if you were actually making an army, they wouldn't all be pink dudes, So we've got pink dudes, we've got light brown dudes, and we've got dark brown dudes. So you can have some variety in there. And then obviously we're also trying to look at like what hasn't really been done. Like Quinn was made later. Green shirt, you could argue, was made at the anniversary, but like there really wasn't a vintage green shirt. And then when you talk about the Cobra Trooper, these are a little, I've got them rearranged, as you can tell by the color of the bubbles. In the animation, sometimes the guys have H-back straps on their back, and sometimes they have Y-backs.
Yeah.
And so we were like, let's make them both. Now, I'm not telling you that you need to buy 6 Cobra soldiers to have them all. But if you're that guy that's army building, you can get variety. I think for anybody else, 1, and you've checked it off the list, you're good. But if you are that guy that wants to build an army, there's variety built in here so that you can have some differences in that army. So it looks thing. And then technically speaking, I have to look sideways here. So everybody knows the H backs come with the yellow backing. The Y backs come with the red backing. So if you're looking for a specific one, that's how you know.
That's cool. That's really neat that you did that. And the reactions are treated differently than the ultimates. It's not like an open pre-order thing. Like these actually go up for sale. You put them in your stores.
Yeah, exactly. So these will come out in September. They'll be ready. They'll be available. You'll be able to buy them. And that brings up sort of the same issue that we run into with the pre-orders and the ultimates, which is I had to make a guess as to how many we were going to sell.
Oh,
I
okay.
had to make an educated guess on how many to make. So if for some reason I have underestimated or under guessed or whatever else you want to call it, or screwed up on how many to make, and these things sell out, I will go make more. My job is to not make this hard. It may take, 4 months to get them back in stock, because if I go place an order with the factory now for a reorder, it's 60 days to make it and another 60 days on the water. So it'll take 4 months to get here minimum just to make a reorder. But if we have radically underestimated what we think people want for these, we will make more. We will go back and make it. The point is to have fun with it and collect it, not to make it difficult. So if for some reason we have underestimated, who knows, I'm harping on this now and I shouldn't be, is then I'll go back and make it so that you can get them. So don't sweat if like, oh my God, they're immediately sold out. What are we going to do? It's like, we got your back. Trust me, we know as well as you do that then we need to go make more.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, man, you've really dropped a lot of info on your new GI Joe line today. But it looks like you guys are doing some really fun stuff, and you've got a lot of things on the horizon. It sounds like you've got some fun things planned. I'm excited to see this thing that's going to blow all our minds next year.
It is, because it's the same thing. It's no different than this, where it's like, I can't believe they're letting us play us in this sandbox. Then it's like, I can't believe they're letting us go there with it.
Oh, that is cool. That is really, really exciting.
And back to your cold slither snake eyes,
Oh,
not
yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
He's not next year.
Okay.
That's not to say we won't get there.
Sweet. I'm excited. I think you've pretty much covered all the questions I had and then some, but was there anything else that you feel like we should bring up or say to end this off today?
I don't know that there's necessarily something I feel like I need. I feel like I've been talking too much about it, but people are interested to hear what our point of view is. It's in a lot of ways somebody that's probably aware that we exist, but has never bought anything from us.
Of course. Yeah. Well, like I said, every time you introduce one of these new brands, you're definitely hitting a new audience that's never really bought anything from you before. And that's why I'm always a little worried that we're just repeating information, but you always bring something new to the table. I feel like every time we have these discussions. So
you mean I think
it's
sidetracked
awesome.
onto how to make factories?
I mean, there's definitely some sidetracking going on, but that's okay. That's what
it
keeps it interesting.
That's now watched more than one interview is like, God, that guy can't even stay on topic. It's horrible. No, I mean, I have been very, very surprised, and humbled's not the right word, but just appreciative of the response. I thought that we were going to run into a lot more just general negativity around the fact that we weren't making O-rings, or general negativity around why we choose single jointed knees and elbows versus double jointed knees and elbows, stuff like that. And in general, it's really been much more of people going, hey, maybe I don't like this. Like, I'm not buying it because it doesn't have this, or I'm not buying it because it's not O-ring, but I understand why other people might like this. And that's been really refreshing, because generally speaking, I think there's a certain bar that happens that no matter what toy anybody puts out, that there's 20% or however many people that jump in that just hate everything. And And the GI Joe fan base, not unlike any other fan base, is very passionate. And I guess I was bracing for more blowback on the fact that we wouldn't be able to use O-rings than we
Sure.
got.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting because that means either people understand the passion that we put into making what we're doing and appreciate it, whether they're going to buy it or not, or they simply like it as well and find it to be a new take on their GI Joe.
I think that's a good
So
way to look at it. And also the fact, like we talked about earlier, like G.I. Joe is one of those brands that, fans have been hungry for so long, and there's not really been a lot to buy for it. And now there are multiple options out there. And I think that's good. I think it's good that there's lots of different things to choose from.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And we're just going to try to have a whole lot of fun with it and make characters that haven't really either been made at all or only been made once or twice before, maybe not in the way we would have done it, uh, go into parts of the canon of GI Joe that really haven't been touched, surprisingly. So to me, there's an incredible amount of stuff to go down and do that's really exciting, because generally with a franchise that's this big and this popular, that's been around for this long, you know, people have gone into every deep dark corner and found everything. And I think with GI Joe, there's still so much stuff that hasn't been touched.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, very cool. So the Super 7 Ultimates figures are available for pre-order now over at super7.com, and that pre-order is open until August 16th for the first wave. So if this is something you guys are interested in, make sure you get your order in. Looks like they are expected to deliver spring 2022 is what it says next
Yeah,
year. So,
spring 2022.
yep.
We should be able to get them out before CNY, which means then I just gotta then it's the whims of the boats across the
Yeah,
ocean.
exactly. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for once again taking the time to sit down and chat with me about this stuff. I
I
really
feel like it's
appreciate it.
more the opposite of like, thanks, Dan, for wasting an hour and a half
Thanks.
of
Thanks
today.
for
Uh,
listening to me
oh,
talk and go on tangents. No, I
exactly.
told you, man, I really enjoy doing this, and I'm really grateful that you take the time to do this with me so often. So thank you.
It's just a love fest over here, isn't it?
I guess, well, we better cut it off because then that's all everybody's going to
Yeah,
complain about.
you got babies to take care of.
That's right. All right. Well, guys, thank you so very much for watching, and stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be doing this again sometime in the future. So until next time, my friends.